Let's get started. Afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all enjoying day 2 of the conference. I always find day 2 is kind of good. People have sort of chilled down a little bit from day 1, but everyone has a late night tonight at the after party, and so Friday morning is always really, really quiet. So day 2 is a good time to have a talk happening. And very excited to be here today. I always love coming to NDC London, all the way from Australia. I know it's a little bit colder here, but I left at 43 degrees in Perth, so it's sort of nice to have a bit of a break for a little bit. I actually feel like walking outside here, even when it's raining, and I do not at home. So it's nice to have a bit of downtime before I go back and enjoy the beach again. This morning, I'm going to be talking about accessibility and why accessibility is for everybody and why it's everyone's responsibility. Because the world that we live in today relies more and more on technology to live our everyday lives. And we, as the creators of this technology, face an important responsibility to ensure that we're not excluding those around us that we're not excluding those around us who want to use what we're creating. The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. What does it mean when we say to make things accessible? What does that mean for us? When we create these technologies, whether it's software or hardware or something else, it means that anybody can use and interact with it using whatever means they prefer, given whatever capabilities they have. And it means the internet, the technologies and the solutions that we're creating are made for everyone and with everyone in mind. But how is that actually relevant to us? And why is accessibility so important? Because for better or worse, the people who design the touch points of society determine who can participate and who is left out, often unwittingly. All of us here today are in a very important position. That's one to make a difference to the people around us. We have the power to make things better for those in our society and decide who can participate and who is being left out. We can all make a difference in these people's lives. But let's just for a second ignore that accessibility is the right thing to do and that we shouldn't be excluding people from society. What else does accessibility and inclusion actually do for us? Well, a study in 2018 by the Disability Council of Australia found that inclusive teams and workplaces were 10 times more likely to be more effective. They were 9 times more likely to innovate. They were 4 times more likely to provide an excellent customer experience. They were 4 times more likely to stay at a company, and they were 19 times more satisfied with their jobs. And accessibility is a basic human right. We're starting to see drastic changes to legislation and regulations around accessibility and inclusion. Countries all over the world are ensuring their laws are up to date as technology becomes more intermingled with our day-to-day lives. So it's no longer a case of if, but when we're going to be legally required to make sure that what we build is accessible for everybody. The secret is, it's much easier to make changes and improvements as we build things. To include it from the very beginning is easier rather than trying to stick a band-aid on it later. How many of you know if what you're currently building is accessible? How many if you know that it's something that you're working towards? That accessibility is something that you're doing? That it's just being talked about? If you don't know whether or not you're doing it right, you're probably not. Every inaccessible web page tells people with an impairment You aren't welcome in this world. If you don't know whether your website or app is accessible, it's not. Start learning. It's not too late to make a change, to start making improvements, and to make sure that everybody who is using your product feels welcome. So who is it that I'm talking about here? Who benefits from accessibility? Well, when we talk of accessibility, we often think of people with permanent impairments. It could be somebody who is blind or deaf, or someone who is in a wheelchair or who doesn't have use of a limb. And the World Bank estimates that these people with permanent impairments, make up at least 15% of the global population. That's over 1.2 billion people. And these are just people with what we refer to as permanent impairments, which are a small subset of people who benefit from accessibility. Permanent impairments are ones that are not likely to be resolved. They are long-term, things like a missing or a non-functioning limb. There are also temporary impairments, which can't be resolved quickly, but will resolve in the short to long term. For example, somebody with a broken arm. And finally, we have situational impairments, which are a result of the environment alone and can be resolved by leaving it. For example, a parent holding a child or pet. Although not all impairments are permanent, and they may not have as great an impact on a person's life, they can all be made easier by accessibility improvements that we make. Impairments are then split up into one of 4 different areas. We have hearing impairments, where they have impaired, limited, or no hearing in one or both ears. Vision impairments, where they have impaired, limited, or no vision, and this can include things like colour blindness or glaucoma. Mobility impairments have impaired, limited, or no movement or control of movement, and this can include conditions like Parkinson's that affects fine motor control. And lastly, we have cognitive impairments, which impacts how information is being processed and includes a wide range of conditions such as dyslexia, ADHD, autism, limited language proficiency, migraines, epilepsy, and more. So again, I want to ask, who benefits from accessibility? Taking into account permanent, temporary, and situational impairments, considering impairments that impact hearing, vision, mobility, and cognition, who are we helping by making things more accessible, and who are we excluding by not? When we make things accessible, everyone benefits. Every single one of us has at some point or will at some point benefit from an accessibility improvement. Think about the last time that you avoided taking the stairs and used a lift or a ramp instead. So I wanted you to have a think about a few other situations. Things like if you've got a broken arm or hand, if you ever had an ear infection that impacted your ability to hear out of one ear, had a migraine, maybe English is not your primary language, people who have dyslexia, have you ever been in a loud environment when you're having trouble hearing things that are going on, like a conference hall at lunchtime? Have you ever tried to use your phone or your computer when there's sunlight or glare on the screen? I know, the sun came out today. I saw it. It exists here. Perhaps you wear glasses or know somebody who does. Maybe you know somebody who is colourblind or who has ADHD, or somebody who has autism. Maybe you know somebody who has epilepsy, or you use an old browser or device. Maybe you've tried using reading mode or a small screen. Maybe you've tried using slow internet. We have that in Australia. Maybe you've tried to use a device while you're holding a child or a pet. Perhaps you've tried multitasking and your attention's only partially on the task at hand. Maybe you've tried using a virtual assistant or an AI. Maybe you know somebody who has had carpal tunnel. Maybe you've tried to watch a video and realised you didn't have any headphones, and you don't want to be that person on the train. Maybe you've tried to press a button on a screen and you've got really big fingers, or just had like a really small button. Maybe you've used night mode on your device. Maybe you know somebody who has limited fine motor control. Maybe you know somebody who's easily distracted. These are all situations that can benefit from accessibility improvements, whether it be captions, clear design, non-complex language, or thoughtful interface layout. One very small touch can make billions of people's lives better and easier. And more importantly, it can make them feel like they're being thought of and included in what we're building. So why is this my responsibility? Why is this your responsibility? No matter where you are in a company, where you sit in a product or project life cycle, we all play a part in ensuring what technology being built is accessible. Whether you're in company leadership, maybe a manager or a team leader, in recruitment, human resources, project manager, product owners, marketing and content writers, designers, developers, QA and testers, DevOps, or security. I know this may not be anybody in this room. If you don't fit into one of these roles, I'd love to have a chat with you afterwards about how you can help. But all of these people play an important role in making sure that we make things accessibly. For example, company leadership can ensure that accessibility is part of our goals and values. From the top down, decision makers have the ability to make sure that it is an important point to be discussed. Anybody who's involved in hiring decisions can make sure that accessibility skills are being prioritised and looked for when hiring new team members. This includes hiring experts in accessibility or people who have an interest and want to make a difference. And have a look at what skills assessments you're giving them during the hiring process. If someone is being hired as an accessibility expert, someone who is just going to be working on accessibility in the front end, do they really need to be able to answer specialist questions around computer science and algorithms? As well as hiring new people, we can make sure that existing team members have skills as well. Organising and prioritising accessibility training so that everybody understands their responsibilities. And it could be something as simple as encouraging them to watch this talk. We've talked about regulations and legislation around accessibility, and it's important that company leadership understand what these are and how they can impact the company. As this changes, they need to be made aware of how it applies to them and what they need to do to make sure that they're compliant. Ideally, staying ahead of the curve to make it easier for the teams implementing it. I mean, how many of you have been asked to do something that was due like yesterday? Yeah, helps if we know in advance. We talked about the advantage of having an inclusive workplace, and it's important to make sure that the policies and procedures reflect this from the very beginning when hiring new team members, all the way through an entire time in a company. So much of building accessible products comes from having teams with a diverse range of views and experiences, and when a workplace is inclusive, it makes it much easier to build and maintain that. Too many projects don't have the accessibility discussion early on, and it's much harder to make changes down the track. When accessibility is being talked about from the beginning of a project, or when it's included on a roadmap from the start, it's easier to make it happen the whole way through the process. It's also important to make sure that accessibility is included in your definition of done or your scope to make sure that it's not forgotten about or swept under the rug. As well as including accessibility as part of the scope, it's important to make sure that a plan for testing exists. Where possible, this should include accessibility user testing by people with lived experience. For example, screen reader testing by screen reader users. Now this is a really important one that a lot of people are responsible for. Does anyone know what this means? To avail oneself of unostentatious vernacular. Use simple language, yes, use small words. Unless absolutely necessary, don't overcomplicate it. Ensure content is written at a level that can be easily understood regardless of education level or language proficiency. Whenever information is being conveyed through images, videos, audio, or other non-text formats, we need to make sure that there is a text alternative being provided in the form of a transcript, caption, description, or similar. Most importantly, make sure that the text alternative can be accessed and consumed by assistive technologies such as screen readers. Make sure that there is enough contrast between text and background colours so that it can be read by everyone. Anybody tried to read their phone outside and it's like light grey text on a white background, or yellow on a white background, or orange on a white background? A lot of things don't work well on light background. This is especially important when text is over the top of a background image or a video, as that can make it really difficult to read. Make sure that the font is of an appropriate size. It seems like an obvious one. No hiding teeny tiny little writing. Most of the time you want a base font size of at least 16 pixels. Make sure that there is a clear hover and focus state for any clickable or interactive elements. This is important to make sure both design and development are involved. Designers can help to keep it in line with brand guidelines, and developers to make sure that it's implemented correctly. This includes making sure that you're not just relying on subtle colour changes that might be missed. You can make it noticeable and obvious while still keeping it on brand. Ensuring that there is clear and understandable errors is really important so that people understand what is happening and what's gone wrong. This means making it obvious so that people with vision impairments can easily find an error and it's recognised and announced by screen readers or assistive technologies. Animations, motion and auto-playing videos can be an issue for a number of different reasons. It can distract and switch focus from the content, it can trigger motion sickness, and in severe cases, it can trigger seizures in people with epilepsy. Now, this doesn't mean you can't use animations, but it's important to make sure that they're not in your face and distracting. There are also ways that developers can check for people's preferences and disable animations if they've opted out. One of the best things that developers can do is to use correct and semantic HTML elements when building out the structure of content. This includes additional functionality, context, and information out of the box, and is compatible everywhere and easy for assistive technologies to consume and understand. Not everybody uses a mouse to navigate around, and a lot of people find it is much easier to use a keyboard or another input device. For people with vision impairments, they can't see where the cursor is on the page, but a keyboard allows them to navigate around the functional elements. For people with a mobility impairment, they may not have the fine motor control to use a mouse or a trackpad, so again, a keyboard's much easier for them. Accessibility has options for both manual and automated testing. Manual testing includes checking things such as keyboard navigation and screen reader compatibility. Automated testing can capture things like color contrast, HTML validation, and text alternatives. It's really good to have a combination of manual and automated tests to make sure that you're catching everything. For the automated tests, once they're written, it's really good to have them integrated as part of a pipeline or process so that they can run automatically as part of a testing suite. Because if a test isn't automated, is it going to be run? No. Every now and then I have someone in the audience that's like, yes, of course, we run them. No, we don't run tests if they're not automated. Although it is useful for people who are building the product to ensure that it's fully tested, there are some things that are best done by people with lived experience. So where possible, have people with impairments test what you're building, whether that's by hiring an external company or a consultant, or ensuring that you have people on the team. When developing security policies, make sure that you're remembering the people that are involved. When procedures are convoluted or unclear, it makes it easier for people to be susceptible to social engineering, and people with cognitive impairments in particular are at a higher risk as they may miss signs. And this can be as simple as things like multi-factor authentication codes. Some people with mobility and cognitive impairments may struggle to put it in within the 30-second time limit. And when these codes are alphanumeric and case sensitive, some screen readers won't announce whether or not a letter is uppercase or lowercase. So so people using screen readers won't actually know the difference between them. Autofill functionality and password managers are especially useful for people with impairments. When these features are disabled, it makes it more likely that people will accidentally enter confidential information into an insecure field. Or people may resort to third-party solutions to help them, which introduces additional risks of their data being compromised. As I said, when using multi-factor authentication, consider people's capabilities. Some people may struggle to access and enter the code before it times out. And especially when receiving an SMS code, sometimes screen readers on the phones won't recognise or announce the difference between uppercase and lowercase. So consider if you are using an alphanumeric code, whether or not it needs to be case sensitive. Now, we've talked about why it's important and what we can do to help, but let's have a look at some hard data. What does this actually mean for us? Let's have a look at some selfish reasons for why we should make things more accessible. A study done by Microsoft and Forrester looked at users with impairments who abandoned online purchases due to accessibility issues. A study estimated that an average European company with a website gets 1 million site visits per day. And if they made their website accessible, they could increase their revenue by an additional 2.3 million euros per year. That's a lot of money. And it's not just Europe. Earlier, we looked at the fact that 15% of the global population has a permanent impairment. And that comes to just over 1.2 billion people in the world. These people can make a big difference to your bottom line if they're able to use your product. Forbes has estimated that these 1.2 billion people, along with their friends and family, have an estimated disposable income of $13 trillion every year. Now, I'm pretty sure that's about 9.5 billion pounds. Sorry, no, 9.5 trillion pounds. It's a lot of money that's up for grabs if we allow people to use our products. Each year, a not-for-profit organisation called WebAIM, Web Accessibility in Mind, do a study on the top 1 million homepages on the internet. In 2025, from those 1 million websites, they found 50,960,288 accessibility issues. That's an average of almost 51 errors per site on the homepage alone. Of these 1 million websites, 94.8% failed to meet accessibility guidelines. That means that almost 95%, that's 950,000 websites were built without considering the billions of people who need accessibility features to use them. This audit was also done using automated testing and therefore not able to test a lot of the criteria. So chances are the numbers of inaccessible websites is higher. Another reason to consider accessibility is the European Accessibility Act, which came into effect in June 2025. And I know we're not part of the EU here. I was here when everybody left. It was sad. There were parties and a whole bunch going on. Now, this applies to ICT products and services and includes websites, apps, software, hardware, and more. And although you're not part of the EU here, if any of your customers or clients or anybody who uses a product that you build is based in an EU country, you still need to comply. Now, I just want to add a quick disclaimer that I do touch on some legal topics. There are a lot of legal aspects and implications that I'm not remotely qualified to advise on. So if the European Accessibility Act or similar legislation applies to you, or if you want to clarify what applies to you, the first step is to speak to a lawyer to make sure that you're getting accurate information from. There are a lot of little steps that we, as the creators of technologies, can make to make people's lives better. To ensure that websites and apps are accessible, the World Wide Web Consortium has developed a set of guidelines, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These guidelines are developed by industry professionals, some staff, some community members, all of which are developed publicly and openly. You may hear them referred to as WCAG or the WCAG Guidelines, even though the G's guidelines. The current version of the guidelines is WCAG 2.2, which was published in October 2023. Each version updates to take into account new technologies. For example, 2.1 introduced guidelines around animations and motion. 2.2 introduced guidelines around drag and drop and authentication. Version 3 is being worked on at the moment and will incorporate additional guidelines around mobile devices and more improvements for cognitive impairments. I'm not 100% sure when that's coming out. Version 3 has been coming out soon since 2019. So any day now. But as I said, these are developed publicly and openly, and you can have a look at the current state those guidelines are on. These guidelines cover 3 levels of conformance: A, AA, and AAA. A is basic accessibility. If you're not meeting this level, people with impairments will have serious issues or be incapable of using your product. AA goes a step further and ensures that people with impairments can use it, although at times it may not necessarily be convenient. If you're working towards an accessibility standard, this is likely what you're working towards. And if the European Accessibility Act does apply to you, it is loosely based on the WCAG AA standard. Finally, AAA is the highest level. This is typically met by organisations whose primary users are people with impairments. Whatever role you're in, it's worth knowing a bit about these guidelines, at the very least that they exist, which you all do now, and what level you have to meet and how to test against them. I'm pretty sure that any companies in the public sector in the UK are required to meet AA standard. as I said, the European Accessibility Act is loosely based around the AA level, and there's being work done to update it to WCAG version 2.2. So if you have to comply with them, it's worth getting up to date with a newer version. When WCAG 2.2 came out in 2023, there are a bunch of really great explainers that go through the guidelines, what the changes are and what they mean. The irony that the accessibility guidelines aren't super accessible because a lot of it's very complex academic language. But the great thing is there are a lot of resources out there that explain it a little bit more clearly if you don't work deeply in the accessibility space. The secret is a little change can make a huge difference. And if you're using a component library, which a lot of us are, there's a chance that one small change can fix hundreds or thousands of issues. So let's take a look again at the data from the WebAIM Million audit. It's 50,960,288 accessibility issues. Of those, 96% are easy fixes. That's over 48 million issues that can be fixed by one small code change. One teeny tiny little change. These issues are from things like insufficient color contrast, from missing text alternative on images, buttons and links that are empty or don't include a label, missing labels on form inputs, and missing document language. This is my favorite one. Doc type, really easy fix. It's first line in HTML file. First line. First line right there, and nearly 1 in 5 websites tested were missing this. Color contrast compares the difference between background and text colors and ensures that there's enough difference between the two that they can be easily read. And almost 80% of the sites being tested had areas with insufficient color contrast. Now, WCAG has a minimum ratio of 4.5 to 1 to meet AA standard and 7 to 1 to meet AAA standard. To determine the color contrast, there's a really great tool called Who Can Use that I like to use, which not only calculates the difference between two colors, but simulates several different vision impairments and compares those as well. For example, red and green may technically pass AA standard with a ratio of 4.5 to 1 and probably make your designer cry. But if people have a type of colour blindness that affects the way they view red and greens, it might fail because there's not enough of a difference between the colours they see. There are also plenty of tools out there that can compare brand colours against one another. This is a really useful tool to provide to your design team because they then know which colours can be used together and still pass the colour contrast guidelines. Having a text alternative for your image is really important because people who can't see the image may miss it. And screen readers or assistive technologies can't describe it to them. And if a picture is really worth 1,000 words, that's a lot of content that people are missing out on. 55.5% of the sites tested were missing a text alternative for images. Now, if you don't have one, the screen reader will read out the file name, which for something like this isn't bad. Although it doesn't give much information, you can probably make the assumption that this is clearly an image of my cat, right? But most of the time, our images have automatically generated names or paths, multi-directories deep, which is not remotely helpful and an incredibly poor user experience, especially because these automatically generated strings clearly aren't words. So the screen reader reads out character by character. Instead, we can add an alt attribute to the image to give the user information about what they can't see. This doesn't necessarily mean describing the entire image, but by describing the important parts of the image, the intent behind its inclusion. If an image isn't conveying any information, if it's purely presentational, we use an empty alt attribute, and this lets assistive technologies know that it's not important and they'll ignore it altogether. And here's a fun hack. If it's a stock photo, probably not important. As well as text descriptions for images, we need to make sure that other media has a text alternative as well. Videos and audio recordings can be given captions and transcripts, and these are beneficial for people other than just those with hearing impairments. I much prefer watching videos with captions. They help me to follow along a lot better, which really annoys my husband because he works in film and TV and he loves our very large TV to watch 4K videos on that I put giant captions on the bottom. Apparently it ruins the experience and editors put a lot of work into making it. But it helps me to follow along a lot easier. And if I don't have headphones, I can still watch a video with captions if I'm on public transport, if I'm at a conference and talk's really boring, without having any audio playing. I can just watch it with captions. If a video pops up on Instagram and doesn't have captions, I'm not watching it because that would require turning the sound up on my phone and listening to the horrific background music that is on everything. So if it doesn't have captions, it does not exist to me. If you're relying on graphs and charts, make sure that there's a text description for them as well, so that people who can't see them can still understand the information. Now, a lot of the time, this is different than just providing the raw data. The reason why we use graphs and charts is to make it easier for people to understand the data and what's happening. We can use attributes like ARIA labelled by and ARIA described by to link a description with a visual element like an image. For example, here we have the description bar chart that shows that revenue for Q4 has doubled from $1 million to $2 million compared with the previous quarter due to accessibility improvements that helped to widen the customer base. We could provide people a table full of raw data, but the same way as we can visually use a chart to very quickly see the trend in that data, we can use a text description to describe that trend to somebody who can't see the chart. The description doesn't necessarily need to be visually hidden either. There may already be a paragraph of content on the page that exists explaining it, and we can link it up that way. When building things accessibly, we often like to turn to using ARIA attributes. ARIA is a set of roles and attributes that the World Wide Web Consortium defined as part of the Web Accessibility Initiative to help make web experiences more accessible. And this includes a bunch of states and properties that we can use to provide information for screen readers and assistive technologies, and has attributes like ARIA label and role, or ARIA hidden and ARIA invalid. And while it's really good to have this ability, a lot of this has now been baked into HTML, and it is often easier for us to use semantic HTML. And now, literally from the ARIA guidelines, the first rule of ARIA use is if you can use a native HTML element with the semantics and behaviour already built in, instead of repurposing an element and adding an ARIA role, state or property, then do so. The first rule of ARIA is if you don't have to use it, don't use it. For example, instead of adding role navigation, I can use a navigation element and it gets this information already, and the screen readers and assistive technologies can interpret it the same way. Much easier. Make sure that your form inputs have labels associated with each of them. Even if your design doesn't visually display them, you can hide the labels and keep them linked up so that screen readers know what each input is. So we can link labels with inputs using the for and ID attributes. The ID attribute is separate from the name and can be randomly generated so that it's unique on a page. The placeholder attribute, while it does display in the field, is not announced by or even recognised by screen readers. So it's really important to make sure we're linking these up properly. Of the million tested websites, over 48% were missing labels on form inputs. Which, given the fact that these are home pages being tested, that's probably a lot of search inputs that just need to have a hidden label being added. Automated testing. If you've got an existing pipeline for automated tests, have a look at integrating some accessibility testing in there. Start running validations and check to make sure that you're not introducing any new issues as you write new code. If you don't have an automated testing pipeline, I have a blog post that can help you get started with a testing pipeline in GitHub Actions. It helps to understand what people experience when they're using a screen reader. And there are plenty of free or paid options, plus those that are built into Windows, Mac OS, Android, and iOS. So next time you're at your computer, I would like you to try opening up the screen reader. Navigate around a web page, see what you can find, see what you can do, see what it tells you about what you can see on the page. And if you're feeling up to it, try closing your eyes and see if you can work things out without actually seeing the screen as well. And for those who haven't used a screen reader before, I've got a little demo here, if the audio works.
DDD Brisbane at level 4. DDD Brisbane is a non-profit community event. DDD Brisbane is currently, link, sponsorship at brisbane.com, link, info at brisbane.com, link, view the agenda.
So give it a go with a screen reader, get a little bit used to going and seeing what you can access, seeing what you can do and what you can't, and get a bit of an idea on the experience that people who use screen readers every day has. Now, one of the reasons it is super useful for us as developers to get an idea on this, but when we're doing proper screen reader testing, it is often useful to have screen reader users to do the testing. Because here is an example of a screen reader user.
You notice that JAWS repeats to me each character as I type it. That way if I make a mistake, I can hear it and I can backspace. And I can retype it again. Now I'll press enter. Oh, it says SLCC. It sounds like I'm on the right page. Okay, here we are at home.
This is somebody who uses a screen reader every day. What's the first thing that you noticed when listening to their screen reader? It's very fast. Get in the practice of using a screen reader, but if you're wanting to make sure that screen reader testing is done properly, it is important to investigate getting somebody to do it where you can. Because unless you're using a screen reader on a daily basis as your primary method of accessing content on the internet, it's really hard to replicate that experience. People who use screen readers do it a little bit differently. They have their own customization set up and they listen to it incredibly fast, because That's how they're able to scan content on a page when they can't see it visually. Now, I'm going to assume that all of you understand how important training and personal development is, given you're here at a conference. Yay, training and personal development. And it's really exciting that you're all here to come and learn new things and see some of the amazing speakers and presentations that we have this week. There are plenty of options for training and upskilling around accessibility. So find one that works for you or your team and in a format that works for them. For example, some people prefer in-person workshops, some self-paced online, some prefer reading books and blogs. Intopia is a digital agency that specialises in accessibility. They have a heap of different courses available. They run internally and public courses and target different roles and teams, including design, development, content writing, testing, project management, app development, and more. So if you're wanting to do some more in-depth accessibility training, I recommend checking their stuff out. Sarah Sowerden has spent quite a while working on an online course, and it was released a couple of years ago, and it's targeted as developers and designers, and is a really great self-paced online course to go a lot more in depth in accessibility. And I have a workshop, shameless plug, that I both run internally in companies and through conferences like NDC. So unfortunately you missed my workshop on Monday, but I'm sure it will be back another time. And I do run them internally to cover accessibility and accessibility testing in depth for developers and designers. I want to make a quick note about accessibility overlays and widgets. These are often used as a quick fix to try and make a website accessible. And the problem is they generally don't work. Not only do they not fix things and instantly make a website accessible, in many cases, they make it significantly worse and override any existing settings that users might already have. They also often open a site up to security concerns and potential data breaches. And there's a really great fact sheet about it at overlayfactsheet.com, which includes quotes of support from accessibility experts all over the world about why this is a horrible idea and please don't do it. A few more resources to go through and have a look. Rather than going through all of them, I have a compilation of accessibility resources, which is available at capers.dev/A11Y_resources. This includes all of the resources I mentioned today, includes a lot of the online courses and places to get more information and a few other bits and pieces. So I recommend checking that out if you're looking for more resources later on. Accessibility it's not a nice to have. It's not a we'll do it later, and it's not an additional feature. It makes a huge difference in the lives of billions of people. And inaccessibility excludes them from the technology that makes the rest of our lives easier. It excludes them from being a part of our society, and it tells them that they're not welcome here. And accessibility isn't just for the 1.2 billion people with permanent impairments. It helps all of us, and it makes all of our lives better. Accessibility helps us every day, even when we may not necessarily know it. And most importantly, we can all play a part in making our websites, our products, and our technologies more accessible. We can all make a change. We can take a small step. We can learn one little thing that makes a big difference to somebody who relies on accessibility to just exist in this technology-dependent world. Thank you very much for your time today.